Hello aviators! Originally I wanted to talk more about detents and some VKB configuration software tips, but you'll have to wait for that a bit longer. I collected some other observations, sometimes reservations, about the STECS, and I'll also compare it with two other throttles. So let's start with the various section. First, let's talk about the standard option and why it may be the option you really want. I've seen a few people buying Mini or Mini Plus option and then wondering where the spare parts are. Always check what the option contains. If you want these smaller options and need the spare modules as well, buy the spare parts kit you need, buttons and or detent frames, but then the standard suddenly is not that far off price-wise. So unless you absolutely want the smaller unit, standard may be the way to go. The standard option not only has the spare button modules and detent frames, but also the accessory magazine. Silly me calling it a holder or a tray even. Also the rubberized grip replacements of green and grey color, which I didn't mention in my first video at all. So there's a lot of bonuses with the standard option. Not to mention the stem unit with many more buttons and so. On the other hand, I've tested the STECS Standard on the side of my racing chair, and here the stem module placement wasn't ideal. But this was caused more by the chair intended for car racing, with bumps around the shoulders that made the operation of the closest buttons awkward. This is not a STECS Standard problem per se, it's just a thing to consider with the placement of the stem unit. I solved it by patting the back of the seat so the bumps don't bother me, and now I have no problem with it. I can imagine Max being also a good option for the SimPit setup, but standard works fine as well, especially if you have a chair for flight simulation and not for car racing. STECS is my first dual throttle, so I'm still just discovering how and when to use it properly. The split throttle is great not only for two engine jets, but also for separate controls of the propeller planes, that is RPM, propeller pitch control, and manifold pressure, throttle. It seemed natural to me to use the left throttle for the propeller control and the right throttle, which is kind of the main grip anyway, for the throttle. When the grips are locked, they both send the same value to the PC. Of course, values for both axes are sent. It would be neat if the lock-unlock action generated button press. Obviously the throttle knows about it, so perhaps it could be added in a firmware update. With split throttle, my modifier on the left grip is harder to reach, as I have to reposition the whole hand. Luckily this concerns the wallbirds mostly, where I don't need so many actions anyway, so the modifier is generally used less. Overall, I'm happy with the split throttle and the options it brings, and I like it with the propellers a lot. Adjusting the throttle tension on STECS is easy and fast. The screws are accessible just behind the throttle levers and you don't need any tool to adjust it. STECS being the dual throttle has two separate screws and it can be handy to adjust each throttle differently. Originally I didn't make a fuss about this because adjusting the tension on TWCS was also easy, albeit with a tool and you needed to flip it over. Then I've heard about throttle units where the tension adjustment is more involved. Even in this price range there are throttles you need to open to adjust the tension. It doesn't seem that important at first, and definitely is not when you're all set, but sometimes I change the tension just because I'm in a mood for a lighter or tighter feel, and because I can. In the first part I mentioned the grip, especially the right part, being top heavy. Eventually the damping will stop it unless it's very loose, so if you hold it in position for a while the throttle does not move on its own when locked together. But when the throttles are split, the right part is much more prone to fall forward. This may not be a problem for an occasional growling sidewinder differential thrust style trick, but I mentioned using the split throttle for prop planes as well. With STECS, I can easily set the right throttle tighter to fix this, and also to have a more substantial feeling from the axis, similar to the combined throttles locked together. And I like this detail a lot. So the option to adjust the throttle tension quickly and easily is very handy, and STECS makes this right. It's a matter of seconds and you don't need any tools and you don't have to move the throttle unit at all. Now let's talk about the EU price again. Shortly after I published the first part of the review, a new batch of STECS arrived in Europe and the price didn't go down that much. At 346, these STECSes are just 13 Eurobucks cheaper than the previously shown price, which makes my lucky snatch from September feel even better. At this price range we are probably not that price sensitive, but naive calculation from the current USD price of 279 with conversion and 20% value-added tax would get us somewhere to 310 euros with one-to-one conversion and the same tax to around 335 euros. So there is a bit of premium Europeans need to pay in the EU shop. But this is quite typical for many products, so let's not dwell on it. And now for the comparison. I'll try to compare it with Virpil's CN3 throttle, which I don't own, but I made a lot of research about it, and then we will compare it with my previous TWCS throttle and talk about how good the upgrade is. Virpil's CN3 at this moment sells for 297, which would be 357 with the 20% value-added tax, plus I don't know how much they ask for shipping, but we're suddenly in the same price range, so there is no real price advantage for STECS Standard really. That means it's all about your preferences. I actually like the thumbstick and got used to it, but if you want TDC on the index finger, CN3 is better for you. If you absolutely need the zoom axis under your fingers, go for CN3. I got used to the zoom on the head, up-down, and pressed reset, and have no problem with it anymore. The left side rotary is an encoder on both, and I guess the one on STECS is easier to operate. CN3 grip has 3 heads, one with encoder around it, and 2 buttons on the thumb. STECS has TDC, 3 heads or buttons, these are modular, and the thumb wheel. I guess this is comparable and a matter of preference. The rest of the grip buttons and controls are not that important. STECS has triggers, which gives it more buttons overall, but that's just marginal. CN3 has finger lifts, but STECS has more flexible detent system overall, with programmable virtual buttons for various detent actions. I wanted finger lifts for my upgraded throttle, but now I don't miss them at all. Adjusting the throttle tension on STECS is extremely easy, as I said before. On CN3 you have to open the unit. This might not be a deal breaker for you, but STECS definitely wins here, hands down. STECS Standard base with stem has 10 buttons, 1 5-way rotary, 2 encoders with push, 2 3-way K-switches, and a flip and a toggle switch. CN3 has 6 buttons with customizable backlight, 1 5-way rotary, 2 encoders with push, 4 flip switches, 3 toggle switches, and a nice lever with axis. I could definitely use that axis, but otherwise I'd say they are trading blows. That said, on STECS most of the action is button style or momentary. I know that the red flip switches on the CN3 are not everyone's favorites, but they are there. STECS has no latched switches at all. VKB in general don't seem to be fans of latched switches. You'll not find them on the GNX extension modules either. It's all mostly buttons, I don't know why. CN3 is the way to go for metal fans, of course. The grip on the CN3 is wider from what I've seen. I'm not sure how it affects the reachability of all the features and hand position. I can vouch for STECS throttle grip. It is comfortable and the main features are easily reachable. Of course, sometimes I mess up all the heads under my thumb, but that's the price for so many heads. About quality, we don't know when, if and how our STECSes will start to break. I've heard once about TDC gone on CM2 and also about mushy heads on CM2 and CN3, but to be honest, I'm not that happy with VKB's 5-way heads either. So I'll not compare the quality here, but I believe both are decent representatives of this price bracket. To finish this comparison, it's really mostly about TDC position, how critical any axis on the grip, but not on the thumb, is for you, and other preferences. Next, the alpha comparison with my previous throttle, Thrustmaster TWCS. It got more expensive since I bought it mere 2 years ago, together with the TFRP pedals and T16000M joystick. I can buy it for 95 euros separately in the local shop, which of course is significantly less than the cheapest STECS Mini, which would cost you 250 euros, probably 280 with shipping. And with Mini you'll not get all the button and head modules. Let's start with the quality. Knowing what I know now and having the spare money, I'd go for STECS. Of course, again, I don't know how my STECS will behave in 2 or 3 years, but I know how TWCS behaved. The main axis was imprecise and jittery, especially at the ends. Mini-stick stopped working properly as one direction was indicated on its own, and the action of the throttle is also far from ideal. Yes, there are upgrades for the action, some cheaper, some more involved. Also a Niogel costing half the throttle is recommended for greasing, but the TWCS unit is not well sealed and prone to dust, so you probably have to regrease it regularly. That said, I'd not replace it just because I couldn't do air-to-air refueling properly. I replaced it because the pot on the main axis and some other pot for the TDC were unreliable. And while the main axis pot can be sprayed, I had to do it every other day, and the pot in the grip is very difficult to maintain. TWCS said goodbye and that was it. While it worked, I liked it. The action aside, it was a good upgrade from Hotus X throttle with 2 additional axes on the grip, pinky wheel and rudder pedals, analog mini stick, technically another 2 axes, 2 buttons and 2-way switch on the front, and for the thumb you had an 8-way POV, 2 4-way heads without a press, and 1 button. Sure, STECS has many more buttons and 5-way head options, but at a much higher price. I also like the clear action of the 4-way heads, although I would miss the press now, and thanks to the sliding action, no angle changes, there was never an issue of what direction I actuated. TDC was on the index finger, and the feeling from it was okay in this price category. Also, the cup style head was quite nice. The precision and dead zone was not ideal, STECS OTS is clearly better, and as I mentioned, the TDC on TWCS eventually failed. There was a rotary axis for the pinky, much better position than the thumb rotary on the STECS. Otherwise, the STECS rotary is more solid, although less ergonomic and quite pointy. Ouch. And then there were the pedals that could be used for self-centering zoom axis if you had rudder on your pedals, or for a brake, 1/2 of the axis, and so on and so on. It was there, and there is nothing like this on the STECS. It was very handy for sure, although I've heard that it could also fail in the end. Quality seems to be the main problem with the TWCS. Some people use it for years and are happy, for others it fails after a year or so. Some things can be fixed, but it's just annoying. I was happy with the TWCS while it worked, but it should have lasted longer. And while we're at it, TWCS with T16000M may be an okay combination for beginners. First I replaced the stick for VKB Gladiator, later the throttle for STECS, but the TFRP pedals are just a waste of money. Sliding is sticky, not precise, the same axis problem as with the TWCS, which is potentiometer noise, and it's also very narrow, especially for a male. I know there are not many budget pedals, but if you go for the VKB Gladiator joystick with a twist, it will work better than these pedals. Don't even think about those, or use TWCS pedals for the rudder. Should you upgrade from TWCS to STECS? If you feel the need to, perhaps, but if you don't have any access for the rudder and you use TWCS for it, STECS will not give you anything for that. Have pedals or use a twist on the stick and be sure it works for you as a rudder. Absolutely don't rely on the STECS with your rudder. Unless the button action rudder is enough for you, then perhaps the triggers would work, but I doubt you want non-axis rudder when you go for something like STECS. Obviously, while comparison with Virpil's throttle was a fair one, TWCS is in a different price and quality league, so it's not much about which one is better, but what you get when if you upgrade, and also what you lose. And if you have your rudder covered, you will get definitely much more from STECS, of course. Next time I'll get to the configuration software with some examples, ideas, and we will also talk more about detents, as I promised. I hope this intermission review piece was also interesting, and with that, fly safe and see you later.